list of participants. Thank you, Liz. Thank you. So I want to start by reminding you that this May 15th and 16th, we will have two wonderful classes related to the very, very important topic of heat illness. I know everybody may say, you know what, it's something that we already know about. We don't, it's just everybody knows about it. We don't need a class about this. Well, first of all, you will get CEUs if you attend. And on May 15th is English, May 16th is Spanish. So if you have anybody, any supervisors who are new to or just recently promoted or new to safety, they need to come on board to these webinars. And the Spanish session, get your workers in there, get more people to come on board so you guys can speak the same language. I make it easy to understand. I cover some of the tips that I have gotten right along the many years that I've been doing safety so that you guys do not get cited by OSHA if they show up. Heat illness is an emphasis program, which means here in California, Cal OSHA will stop what they're doing during the summer and they'll send people that may not even have to be out in the field, but they will send them out to visit sites because they don't want anybody exposed to heat or die from heat. So very, very important topic, May 15th, May 16th. I think it's a 2-hour class each day. One is in English, one is in Spanish. And I'll talk about things such as what do you need to have for your plan to be effective. I talk about training, the difference between the training between employee and supervisor, and some of the things that are updates, such as even the handouts and the things that we give to workers when we do training, and which ones of those are good, which ones of those are outdated, because even Cal OSHA has an actual material, one of those printed materials for heat illness that even Cal OSHA consultation is asking to be modified because, vomiting is supposed to be part of heat stroke. So very, very important stuff. Today, the topic is asbestos. I know you're dying to just get to it. So are you putting your workers at risk? I was doing training just recently about asbestos, and it just really pays to kind of go over it and review some of the things that this regulation brings to the table, because there's a lot of different occupations that are exposed, and many times we don't know it because we've done it in the past as a risk assessment, and field workers change locations so often that sometimes this may be overlooked. So once again, thanks for being here. For those of you that are taking this class for the first time, that is my name on the screen. That is my authorization number, and you may be thinking, what is that? So OSHA, I am authorized by OSHA, federal OSHA, and California OSHA to conduct the 30-hour, the 10-hour OSHA classes. If you're interested, English or Spanish, we'd love to put those classes together for you. So Liz just explained the wonderful outreach that the UCLA, UCI, and NIOSH Education Center through the continuing education program they do for you guys. So let us know if you need any of these classes. Okay, so asbestos. What is asbestos? What is it? Where is it found? Associated health hazards, and how to protect yourself and your coworkers against asbestos hazards. Basically, allow them to learn. This is not new for all of you that have been with me during this monthly webinars. You know how big we are in regards to hazard recognition. If you empower workers to be able to recognize the hazard, and then you've also taught them the right way, the hierarchy of controls, they know that the first thing they got to do is eliminate the hazard. And if it cannot be eliminated, how can we control it or abate it, right? The last thing they want to think about is PPE. Because a lot of the times when we do not discuss safety the right way, workers or newly assigned people to safety may think, oh, okay, well, you got to give them gloves, or you got to give them a respirator, or you have to give them Tyvek suits and, things like that, versus, the first thing is, can we stop working with things that expose them to this hazard? And in this particular instance, it's asbestos, right? And there's no safe amount of asbestos that we could breathe and not harm us. So I love just discussing topics that we haven't talked about in a while. And this one we have not touched in the previous years because we've been doing this ever since COVID started. So I just love that we have new topics. And every time that you come up with a new idea, please do let us know. So the content of today's webinar was in great part, it's a combination actually of two different slideshows and research and information. It's in the Federal OSHA website. One was through the Susan Harwood Grant Program and the Labor and Industry Washington OSHA Asbestos PPT. And the other one was the Florida. There's an actual, oh no, actually that's the one for federal, the Susan Hartwood grant program. But there's another one that the Washington Department, Labor Industry Washington Department also put out. So it's two. And the reason I like both of them is because of their pictures. And then I added my own, tint to it, a video that I think is amazing from WorkSafe BC. A lot of you have seen I play those videos, and the reason is because they're awesome. Cal OSHA does not have a dedicated e-tool page for asbestos, which they should. They really should. I'm actually putting some hints there to, hey, please, IH department, industrial hygiene department, please help us have a page to help us and give us an e-tool for asbestos, because they do have one for silica and it's tremendously helpful. And they do have one for lookout tagout, another one for heat illness. And those are great, but we don't have one for asbestos. The reg just appears as it is. There's a one-page fact sheet, things like that do help, but there's nothing like the e-tools, right? So as incredible as it is, asbestos is an amazing type of material that will not disintegrate or just evaporate if it's really hot or if it's out in the sun. So the actual Greek meaning of the word asbestos means inextinguishable. And no wonder, and this is the reason why this was this construction wonder material that would not wear and tear with the years. And it is also an insulator, it's an insulator. So great for fire protection, great to actually put in textiles so that they don't catch on fire, or put it into cars for any of those parts that are needed that receive a lot of friction and heat. Okay, let's put asbestos in it. And so when it was first used, very little knowledge about the hazards from breathing it and eating it, because as all you already know, it's not just the breathing, but you can also have chemicals or hazardous particles going through your mouth, right? So we're going to talk about the two types. There's two main families, and this is the scary part, you guys. You find this in the earth, so it's mined, right? So as this material is being mined, there's more than 100 different types of asbestos known to us, to man. They're grouped into basic families, and the way to remember it is one looks like a serpentine or curly, it's curly, and the other one looks like needles, so it's just straight. But most of the one we see in a lot of the older buildings and building materials prior to 1981 is the serpentine or curly type, which is most famously known as chrysotile. And then the other ones are also included in a lot of the products we use, but it's not as common. So chrysotile is the one that you mostly would encounter in a lot of the, ceilings, spray coatings, etc. Now I wanted to watch this because I really highly encourage all of you to use videos for training. I want you to create your own videos. And if you can also incorporate some of this, they're fantastic. Just a quick second for the video to play.
Can you stop sharing your screen really quick?
Of course. And as we go along, please do let me know if you have questions. You can either raise your hand or chat. A lot of you like chatting, and that's perfectly fine. If you are worried about the questioning, I will take questions at the end as well.
There's been unnecessary deaths as a result of this, and that is going to continue for a period of time to come.
It is a very good building material. There's no question about it. The only problem is now we've discovered that it kills people.
Building trades workers, construction workers, millwrights, engineers, or just production workers who happen to be around the material when it starts to disintegrate or when there's a repair being done are exposed.
There was enough evidence out there decades ago to put a stop to using these products. Why they would have a mineral like that going into homes and schools and hospitals doesn't make any sense.
The hazard is asbestos, and the danger is breathing in the fibers when they're released into the air. Older homes and buildings can have many asbestos-containing materials, such as vinyl tiled flooring. These tiny fibers become airborne during renovation or demolition and become deadly.
Prior to 1978, it was a free-for-all. Use it any way you want. You know, when I started in the early 70s in one of the petroleum plants up in northern British Columbia, I was openly working with asbestos dressed the way I am right now. I mean, other than a hard hat and a pair of gloves. No respiratory protection, no coveralls, no containment, none of that stuff. My task was to take finishing cement off the existing tanks and save it because it wasn't available. You couldn't buy it anymore. Maybe that was the first indication there was some problems.
It's in a lot of building products that were used in industry and in commercial buildings. And people may not believe it, but it's also present in a lot of building products used in houses.
Early 70s, I was doing some home renovation in an old house we had on the east side of Vancouver, and part of that renovation was to sand off an old chimney coming up through the ceiling so it would look, you know, nice. And I'm like an idiot sanding it with power equipment, right, to get the old mortar off. You know how it sticks on the brick. You want to see the red brick. Mortar was full of asbestos, and it was in clouds in my kitchen for a week while I was wearing a little paper mask. So I was heavily exposed then. I don't know what will happen to me. I'm hoping that nothing, you know, as I get older, but that's a typical thing. I mean, you know, I didn't think about it.
If you go and tear something out that's got asbestos in it and you get fibers released and you don't know how to clean up properly and you don't know how to dispose of it properly, you're not only putting yourself at risk, you're putting your other household members at risk, your kids and what have you.
When a worker breathes in, asbestos fibers flow down the air passages deep into the lungs. Immune system cells try to break down the asbestos fibers and become damaged and die. Scar tissue forms around the dead cells. Asbestos fibers can remain in the lungs for long periods, and the scar tissue that results continues to develop for many years after exposure. Eventually, so much scar tissue develops that the lungs stop working.
My dad was very, very health and safety conscious. I know that if anybody had said to him that the products that he was handling could potentially make him sick later in life, he would have taken whatever precautions were necessary. When he retired, without being in any sort of accident or incident, working in a mill and working on high voltage, I think we sort of thought he was safe and that, you know, we didn't have to worry about that part anymore. So, yeah, to learn that what he was dying from was a workplace exposure, it was devastating. The frustrating thing was he'd been healthy his whole life. His parents had both lived to late 80s, early 90s. There was no health issues in his family. So he had every expectation of a sort of a long, healthy retirement. So it was hard.
One of the diseases associated with asbestos exposure is mesothelioma. Mesothelioma is a cancer, but it's a cancer of the lining of the internal organs of the body. So you've got a lining of your lungs and you've got a lining of internal organs in your main body cavity, and this is where this particular cancer hits. If you're going to work on your house, if you're going to disturb this stuff, there are ways of doing it safely, but you have to make an effort to find out what those are. It can be in your ceiling, it can be in your drywall, it can be in your floors, it can be in your attics. Don't just have somebody in and tear this stuff out without taking the appropriate precautions, because you put yourself at risk, you put your family at risk, and the contractor is at risk.
Asbestos disease is the #1 killer of workers in BC. If you're working on an older home or in the renovation or demolition industry, always test for asbestos and only remove it if you are trained and qualified. For more information,
Can you go ahead and stop the video?
WorkSafe BC.
So, like I said, the videos are really good. And right now, the issue with mesothelioma and asbestos is that they're underreported because a lot of these issues, the respiratory issues, get misdiagnosed since they occur little by little. And asbestos, as you know, is something that will take 15, 30 years to develop. So workers, most of the time, go to their family doctor, family physicians. It takes a long time for this thing to be diagnosed. And then a lot of the numbers are not real. But yes, this is from British Columbia, but the numbers are very, very similar here in the United States. In California, we do have a requirement to actually be certified through OSHA, which is an actual requirement for the removal of asbestos when it is an area greater than 100 square feet for any type of material that contains asbestos in an amount of 0.1% and above. So that's nothing, right? And you still have to be certified to remove this type of material. So keep that in mind because that's the law. That's the law. You have to be certified for asbestos removal anytime you work with material that you are going to actually remove, right? And disturb. And therefore, you can tell because of that 0.1% and more, how small amount and how serious this issue is. And I know I had a couple of questions. Let me just continue to share my PowerPoint. And I'll see what those questions are all about. Yes, I love this. So one of you liked that video and would like to actually incorporate it in your training. This is the reason why I play these things because this is the one that I play on my awareness training, which is mandated. I do have aside from sending you the link to this video, I want to also send you what I put together as an outline for asbestos awareness training, just the awareness training, because when you get into the removal of work, or actually class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4 of asbestos work or removal, the actual requirements are very stringent when we talk about training. So you're thinking, what is she talking about? The regulation classifies the type of work your workers do into 4 groups. And depending on those 4 groups, you can see, oh, my workers fall within number 2 or number 3 because, they're plumbers and most of the time they encounter, or all we service is older buildings in the, let's say, LA County area or wherever you're at. And that way you can go ahead and classify and go over what type of training per the class of job that they are doing. Okay, so as always, you've always known that I am big on reading the regulation, reading the definitions, because it does provide you a lot of that extra information that we don't go over during the class because it would be really boring to read the regulation. Nevertheless, awesome video, and I'm glad you're thinking of incorporating it. I use it for my awareness training, and I'll show you now a page of my actual outline. So every time I do training, for those of you that are new or newish to my classes, I'm big on documenting trainings the right way. So even the OSHA IIPP model program gives you a roster, a model of a roster and information that a training roster should contain. But then when push comes to shove and you are required to demonstrate that you did due diligence to go over a specific topic for the health and safety of the workers, you want to document the outline, what was discussed, the time it took you to discuss that. So start time and end time, and the language. And never forget to add the name of the person who provided the training and their actual signature, right? Many times also having a file of their credentials is also very helpful. 2 hours want to know if this video can be inserted. Yes, please do. WorkSafe BC is if you go to their website, you can take a look at how they actually have a disclaimer that says, hey, use this material and distribute it. So there's no problem with using their videos. So WorkSafe BC, and do include it into your awareness training. For the awareness training, you are required to go over the health effects of asbestos, the locations of ACM and PACM in the building and facility. And you're like, what the heck is that? ACM is a term in the definitions when you read the reg. It's asbestos containing material, right? And for any material to be defined as ACM, it needs to have 1% of asbestos in it or more. And then PACM means presumed asbestos-containing material. And you have to discuss why is it that it's presumed, and many times it has to do because of the year that material was installed, right? And because you can get an idea that that may be asbestos containing. Like, for example, when you go to an old building and you see the popcorn ceiling, right? Not all popcorn ceilings are asbestos containing, but you will not know just by looking at it. So you call those Pac-Man, right? I call them Pac-Man just because it's almost like Pac-Man, but it's that PACM is an actual presumed asbestos containing material just because of when it was installed, and until you test it, you will not know. So it's presumed. How to recognize? So include pictures, and it is even better if you include pictures that you have taken out in the field so that, you know, guys, this is asbestos containing material, is in such and such location, so that your workers know, so that they recognize. Review the requirements in the standard. So I bring a copy of the actual regulation so that they can have it if they need it. Make sure you bring one in the language. So just have it translated, because OSHA does not have all the regulations translated into both languages. Review the appropriate response to fiber release episodes. So if you've already had issues where accidentally there was a release of fiber, it could be that the bag where you put your HEPA vacuum actually tore for some reason, although the actual bags are required to be of a certain thickness, but something like that happens. What do people do? So reporting by, depending on what the workers are doing, it could be just reporting by way of picture, removing themselves, right? Instructed to leave in place, isolate themselves from hazards. So you're going to put in your outline what you discuss with your workers depending on what they do, because this is just awareness training. Each such employee shall also be trained at least once a year. So this is one of those requirements in the regulation to have annual training. There it is, the copy of the standard. Smoking cessation programs. The smoking thing is a very important issue to talk during awareness training. And then you also have to talk about procedures. If there's anyone causing damage to asbestos materials, and you have to go over the entire thing of housekeeping. So there's a list right here. Then I also have a silk awareness training outline there. I'll send you it if you want the full document. But yeah, the actual housekeeping talks about all surfaces shall be maintained as free as practicable of ACM waste and debris accompanying dust. So these are in the reg, and then you have to explain to the workers each one of these housekeeping required measures. So this is OSHA requirements. All right, so now I go back to my PowerPoint. And I know you guys are making notes. Some of you are wanting the link or this document. I'll send it to you. They used to wrap mummies in asbestos-containing material. So this thing is old, very old. We knew about the hazards back in the time of Aristotle, but we just, many times, you know how it is. Industry puts something out that is really good. They're buying it, and there's a lot of stakeholder input. And then we need to make sure that there's safety measures in place. So although the material is still being used and not completely banned, so not all of the asbestos types are banned, we need to make sure that our workers stay safe. That's your responsibility as an employer. Once again, the 6 different types of asbestos that are most common found out there in building materials are the ones on your screen, but the one that we said is likely to be included in buildings and any installation of materials prior to 1981 would be the chrysotile type. They're very, very small, so you cannot see whenever there's fibers released in the air because they are invisible to the human eye. So they're super, super small that they can stay suspended in the air for even days. So they can enter your lungs, and as you saw, these are such small type particles that they will reach all the way down to the alveoli, where the exchange of oxygen and air occurs in your lungs, right? So does not break down over time, etc. And just to give you an idea, here is that term of ACM may vary from 1% to more of asbestos-containing material. And I love this picture because it just shows you a penny and 2 grains of rice on it, and then just a speck of dust on a penny, how it already contains more than 20,000 fibers of asbestos, right? And the actual permissible exposure limit is 0.1 fibers per cubic centimeter of air. So that's very little. There is really no safe level of asbestos in the air. There's a ton of different occupations that are exposed. such as plumbers, demolition workers, construction, remodeling, roofers, mechanics, responders, people in the automotive industry working with older cars, because all of those vintage cars were asbestos ridden. They had asbestos on the hood, the brakes, the clutch, gaskets, etc. Then we have vermiculite. And what is vermiculite? So aside from asbestos being found in adhesives, cements, mortar, sealers, millboard, etc., we do have a insulator that was mined back in the day in Montana. Libby was the actual, Libby, Montana was the actual location of the mine. And this exposure to asbestos during the mining process has killed more than 10% of the population. So I love this little diagram because I have my awareness training session go over it so that people kind of locate that in older buildings, asbestos can be found where. So this is a good one to use. This is found in the asbestos.com website. And then talking about properties of asbestos is part of your required to do. I love this picture. And this one is, I believe, from the Washington OSHA, right? And this one shows the rock with the fiber, the line of the fiber of asbestos mineral. And it's flexible, heat resistant. It's good electrical resistance or a good insulator. And it also is very fire resistant, chemical resistant, etc. So it was used extensively in a ton of products, right? There's colors to it. Chrysotile, it's called also white asbestos because it looks whiter than the other ones. Amosite is brown and chrysotile is blue. But I teach the workers that don't be fooled by these terms. You cannot tell the color. You cannot tell when there's an asbestos-containing material. You would just not know, okay? Something that is important to know is sonolite is the type of attic insulation that was widely known and used, and it's still present in many buildings and homes. So if you have knowledge of sonolite insulation being present in the building where you are working at, or even in your home, this is for your own family safety, don't use the attic because you do not want to disturb those fibers. You don't want to store things because then the fibers are going to be settled on the things that you store. And every time you go to your attic, you're going to get it on your clothes, etc. And the reason is that vermiculite from this brand, the Sonolite brand, came from Libby, Montana, and it was contaminated with asbestos. So we have to assume it's one of those PACM, okay? Presume that it is an asbestos-containing material. Picture. So a picture is worth 1,000 words. Make sure that you talk about things that you can find for workers. So vinyl asbestos flooring, sheet vinyl containing asbestos, spray-on fireproofing material, piping, insulation, how it looks like, and talk about also about the terms friable, being friable, non-friable. Friable means that when you touch that kind of asbestos that you encounter at work, it'll crumble easily, which exposes you to the fibers that are released easily in the air. Asbestos millboard, wall ceiling, especially around furnaces and wood burning stoves, gaskets, fabric and HVAC systems. If there it is a damaged asbestos gasket, roofing from the 1920s, and the felt and the shingles, the tar, paper, all of it asbestos-containing materials. And the content of asbestos in it and the type you will not know about it until you test it, right? But for example, a lot of workers do encounter having to cut pipe, and cement pipe, many times called transite, is also one of those asbestos-containing materials. And so there has to be special procedures for the workers to whenever they have to cut it so that they are not sewing and releasing all this fabrics, all these fibers everywhere. And there's PPE that they need to use. So if you don't have any of these things in place, you either outsource it or you develop the SOPs for these types of activities according to the regulation. More pictures on tile. In the 1980s, we saw a lot of this, or what we saw also were shingles and siding. And you can see here in the pictures how removal done correctly looks very interesting. The workers are all suited up. They have the respiratory protection. They have their gloves. They tape the gloves to the Tyvek suiting because that way they do not have fibers coming into contact with any of the clothes or their skin under the suit. There's also boots that are also assigned either for the work that you're doing or covers over the boots if you're working with your regular shoes. And then as you take off your PPE, you continue to wear those shoes. So there's a lot to it on setting up the work area, on putting those signs that are required by law, danger, asbestos material being removed, etc. Because what you do not want to do is workers encountering issues like this in the pictures and doing work where they're moving materials, removing materials, and it's uncontrolled exposure during a removal job. And we now know if you're going to remove anything that is asbestos containing, more than 100 feet on any material with 0.1% or more of asbestos containing material, you need to be certified, right? Or look for a certified professional to come and do that work for you. Do not expose your workers. Right, so there's joint compound plastered with asbestos. And I love this one. I actually printed one out and it's 2 pages. It's a 2-page handout that I give my workers and I have them circle if they have come in contact with or worked with or disturbed any of these materials at any point in time. And you are going to be fascinated. It's a great activity. They start talking about, what they do at work. They, laugh. They say, oh, I can't believe it. I didn't know that caulking had it. Or there's one that says, let's say wiring installation, hayback duct installation, brake shoes, chalkboards. Like people say, what? And so the backing of the older chalkboards in schools, that's asbestos containing material. So things that are like, what, really? Laboratory gloves, fire blankets. Okay. Very cool. So it's a very good discussion. And then, you talk about the terms that are important for them to know. This is super important. Anything installed prior to 1981 is a presumed asbestos-containing material, such as surfacing materials, thermal system insulation, and flooring, right? And it has to be handled as if it had asbestos, as if it was an actual proven asbestos-containing materials, unless proven otherwise, which means you would have to send it to the lab, send samples to an accredited lab. Remember that the most dangerous thing about asbestos exposure is that it is a silent killer because it takes many years for one of these diseases to show up. When we talk about diseases, it's important to tell them about the symptoms. It's important to talk about cigarette smoke and asbestos and how that increases your chance of getting sick with lung cancer. And I love all of these drawings and pictures because it shows, it's particles in the air like dust, because workers many times think, wait a minute, so there's dust and particles in the air we breathe. What do you mean this thing will actually reach very deep into my lung? And so you just kind of explain, depending on the size of the particle, the bigger sizes, the dust, that's why our boogers, when you sneeze, all that boogery material allows for the dust to just come out, and those bigger particles will come out with it. But the very tiny small ones are capable of traveling all the way down to the alveoli, which are the last very end part of the branches, if you will, inside your lungs, right? And that's where the exchange of oxygen occurs. Very, very important, because you don't want to develop that scar tissue, because it doesn't stop. Once scar tissue starts forming, it extends, and you develop something called asbestosis. And then there's also something else, which is mesothelioma. Another tip right here, guys, when you talk about these topics, you do not just go over asbestosis. It's same as with silica. You don't just talk about silicosis. You have to talk about all the possible different diseases that come about because of the exposure to this type of air contaminant. So talk about mesothelioma and what that is, which is the cancer of the lining of your organs, lung cancer, asbestosis, which is the actual creation of that scar tissue in the lung, and other cancers, right? And I love this picture that I think this one is from the Florida. Susan Hartwood Grant developed these materials, and, not just breathing it, but sometimes if workers do not have appropriate hygiene practices and they do not remove personal protective equipment adequately, they may take it home, or they may eat it with their sandwich, right? Taking it home is horrible. Think of your children. Now you're bringing all these fibers, and whenever mama is washing the clothes or daddy is washing the clothes and shaking the clothes, what's going to happen? The child is right next to you, right? Or now you're putting it in the washer, and now it's going to be in the baby's clothes. So a lot to think about with the exposure to asbestos. That's why your procedures to deal with it have to be so neatly developed and tight, right? And if you can and not deal with it and outsource and get rid of that problem, that would be so much better. So all these little red dots that look like ants are different areas in the human body where the asbestos fibers could actually settle down and take a hold of you. So when we say other cancers, we're talking about stomach cancer, cancer of the esophagus or the larynx. So, or the intestines, right? Because they just settle there in that tissue. All right. So I love that picture. Then, of course, you know, showing them examples, discussing real cases. This man who was forced to retire at age 50. Who wants to retire from poor health? And then he dies from asbestosis at age 66. That's a very young man. And that's what the woman in the video was saying. My father was looking forward to a healthy retirement, right? So impact your workers with these stories. And especially if you have a story that is more personal to share, feel free to do so. It really makes a difference. You can see everybody's wheels turning as you're explaining this. Like this one, diagnosed in 1985 with pleural mesothelioma. And he dies 5 months later at age 36. And you're thinking, whoa, that's so young. And you're thinking, but wait, if you said that it's 15 to 30 years to develop, so he was a child? So what do you mean this is exposure at work? If you read on, his father is the one that exposed him from childhood. From when he was very little, he would come home and his clothes were covered in this stuff, but he didn't know it. So this man was exposed from very early in life, and then he continued with the same type of work as his father did at that same plant, and he died from asbestosis. So very, very sad stories. They do make a point. This chart, I love it because here, when there's no exposure to asbestos, 70 out of 100,000 lung cancer deaths in the general population, 70 out of those 100,000 are because of lung cancer, right? But when you add the issue of asbestos, that takes it up 5 times higher risk, right? But then if you say smoking, just smoking by itself, 10 times higher of getting lung cancer. But if you put them together, asbestos and smoking, that increases your chance 50 to 90 times, right? So higher risk. It is huge. And this is why the regulation actually requires that employers discuss the availability of smoking cessation programs. Because, and I was thinking, you know, that's so interesting. The same for silica. Silica also talks about the issue of smoking and talking to workers about it so that they think about quitting smoking, especially if they have to work and be exposed, even if it's under the permissible exposure limit. That doesn't matter. It's just the fact that they will have the exposure. And what happens is smoking lowers the body's ability to deal with respiratory contaminants, with air contaminants. You're already smoking, and so your body's dealing with that. And so it lowers your defenses and it opens you up to issues such as asbestosis. We talked about this. And so we're talking about the potential for asbestos-related disease depends. So people need to know, because many times they, you know, they start asking questions like, wait a minute, I've done these jobs and I've worked in these buildings and I did this for 5 years of my life. So what does that mean, you know? And so you have to tell them, listen, it depends not only on the amount of fibers inhaled, which will depend on the asbestos-containing material percentage in the actual materials that you were working with or removing or disturbing. The length of the exposure, right? Was it half an hour, 30 hours, 5 minutes, a minute, because there was some, you know, crumble down piece of material on the floor and you had to clean it up. And that was 5 years ago. And that's all your exposure that you've ever had. Okay, what's the length of exposure? And whether exposed worker smokes, that takes it up a huge notch, and your age because of delayed effects. So not enough can be said about the need to stop smoking if you are a person who works in the removal of asbestos, or if you are ever coming in contact with Pac-Man, I call it, right? And now you all know what that means. PACM, presumed asbestos-containing materials. And I want your workers to be very familiar with all these terms, like the term friable, right? And there's the picture showing how it easily crumbles. More on this wonderful discussion about evaluating asbestos hazards. You know, you got to know what is the type of material you're working with. We will not know if the content of asbestos in that material is more than 1% unless you test for it, right? Is it friable? Is it non-friable? What's the location? Is the location isolated or is it accessible to workers? If it's isolated, then, you know, the workers that work around that area, and if it's intact and in good condition, don't have to worry about it, although it's an older building with asbestos-containing materials. But if the materials are intact and you're not going to disturb them, perfect. But it is different if it's not isolated, it's very accessible to workers, the building is old, and they're doing activities that may expose them, such as what? You know, drilling holes to hang pictures or, you know, doing some plumbing job. All of that matters. And I love it when workers start recognizing these hazards and they go, okay, so what I have to do now is take a picture, let them know that this is Pac-Man, right? This is a presumed asbestos-containing material because of where I'm at, and I'm not going to touch it. I'm not qualified. I haven't received the training, right? Even if it's, you know, a tile that is crumbling down and now it's dirtied up all the area that they need to clean up. Things like that. You're protecting your workers. They know what to do. They know to stop, etc. So doing the exposure evaluation, providing training, providing medical surveillance. It's a requirement. Medical surveillance is for those workers that are exposed 30 days or more within a year at or above the PEL, even if all of those controls are in place. But you need to do medical surveillance on those workers, right? And developing your exposure control plan. There's a picture there of air monitor equipment on a worker to find out how the content or the fibers that he's been exposed to. Remember that the PEL, as I said, is 0.1 fibers per cubic centimeter of air in an 8-hour time weighted average. For those of you that are new to this TWA, time weighted average term, that is used for all toxic substances across the board for OSHA and Cal OSHA for exposures at work. And what it means is, you know, you may have, if we talk about noise, you also measure it in an 8-hour time weighted average, because sometimes, you know, you have a lot of noise and then no noise and then no tools and a lot of tools. So throughout your 8-hour shift, you will have noise exposure that varies. So the average, you take a formula and you average it out. And if it's under the PEL, then you're not exposing them beyond what you're legally prohibited to expose them to. But if you take that formula and you calculate the 8-hour time weighted average, and it is above the PEL, then you have to do something. And it goes through the hierarchy of controls, eliminating the hazard. How can you get rid of this problem completely? That's number one. Next, work practice controls. And third would be PPE. So you must conduct periodic air monitoring if that's exposure evaluation and monitoring whenever the levels in the air are likely to be at or above the PEL, right? Whenever you are conducting an asbestos project, right? And if there are changes in processes, controls, work practices, or workers, you have to notify affected employees. I switched the words there. Oh, goodness, my brain is now being affected. Maintain exposure monitoring records for a duration of employment plus 30 years. And that's across the board with any exposure to any chemical or carcinogen. You must keep records for 30 years plus. Oh, that's an interesting question. If there's an actual increased risk whenever smoking, even if it's medical marijuana or not. Well, all smoking. Remember what I said? If you just research the effects of smoke in the human being, there's a lot of research. It's not conclusive, and especially when I was reading some of the publications and peer-reviewed literature about how smoking lowers the autoimmune response for those exposed to silica or asbestos. They don't know exactly, but it makes sense, guys. Every time we are inhaling smoke of any type, any smoke, your body is having to deal with it, right? Your lungs are dealing with it, and there's a response to it. So once you break down those defenses that your body has through the smoke of just cigars, cigarettes, whatever you're smoking, then your ability to deal with other air contaminants is less strong. It's not as good. See, so you compare one individual that doesn't smoke with one that smokes, the ability to deal with air contaminants is huge. So the answer to that is I do not have any information about the smoking of marijuana and its correlation with asbestosis or any of the asbestos-related illnesses, but there is a lot of evidence in regards to how it does affect how we deal with air contaminants. Just smoking in general, right? Another wonderful picture about how asbestos exposure is controlled, and the regulation talks about engineering and work practices. This is a great picture. I love the gloves, right? So it's a bag. He's removing, I believe, or replacing piping, and he has to cut through insulation. The insulation has asbestos materials. And look how cool he set up his whole area. He's in PPE, and trust me, on the floor, there's always their area where they have, their decontamination area, and they have this plastics before all the tools and everything they're using is set up prior to starting work. And then this bag is designed and is 6 mil thick so that it contains all of the asbestos, and it's not going to release fibers, but it also allows gloves. It's like a glove thing for them to do the work. Showers, decontamination showers. Just a picture of how that would look like at the site. But this slide refers more than anything about the requirement to provide training, right? Initially and annually, and then making sure you go over the worker protection, right? Just the PPE, respirators, gloves, head. It's important. It's very, very important. Actually, one of the very common questions I get during awareness training has to do with the wearing of a paper mask, an N95. That is not allowed for the work with asbestos materials or abatement, etc. So an N95, the actual, it's a filtering piece, right? And what that means is the actual paper mask, although it's NIOSH approved, if you buy the good thing, you're not dealing with K95s, which are not tested here in the United States. You're dealing with real N95s with a NIOSH marking. Well, it's a filtering piece. And so the holes, if you look at it under, even if it's through the light or under this, and you see that it has openings, right? And through the light, you're only going to see some light coming through. But in reality, the actual openings are 0.3 microns of size. And the fibers, and not just for asbestos, but for other air contaminants, the fibers are smaller. So they will go through that filtering piece, through that filtering material very easily. So you cannot wear an N95 for asbestos abatement. Warning signs for regulated areas. There's some mandated wording for it. And then building facility and owner responsibility. This is huge because many times we don't think about the fact that whatever building your workers are at, any field work they're doing, the building has to have an actual asbestos prevention program and exposure control plan, where they have also mapped the actual presence, location, and quantity of asbestos-containing materials. And so this is huge because it's information for your workers as they start the work, right? For some buildings, it's mandated. For example, public schools are required to have it. And in California, you are not to the serve, like I said, unless you're certified, whenever you're going to work with or remove more than 100 feet of asbestos-containing material. So talk about, when they come in contact with asbestos and it's, let's say, a demolition site or just an area where they encounter materials that are presumed to be asbestos containing, what should they do? So this is very important, the regulation, that you tell them sudden release or if they encounter it. And I give you some ideas in the outline there because you have to document exactly what you said or make a reference to the document that you are discussing, okay? More pictures on how it really looks like when certified professionals are removing asbestos and how they set up their tents, their PPE, all the plastic, all the actual signs out there, etc. And then, when depending on, and this is just a general, like we said, today we're going to just kind of highlight those issues that bring about, are your workers at risk? Take a look at this picture. Just for custodial and light maintenance work, there's that powder, residue powder on the tile, debris on the floor, right? So what are you going to allow your workers to do? Oh, just go ahead and get sweeping, right? Dry sweeping. Dry sweeping is forbidden because now you have fibers up in the air. Regular vacuum, I just vacuum the heck out of it. Regular vacuuming cannot be done when you have Pac-Man or presumed asbestos-containing material. Why? because it has to be a vacuum with a HEPA filter, which is a special type of filter that will trap those asbestos fibers. Changing lights, and then talking about the materials of concern, right? And then do's and don'ts go very, very much into the not disturbing asbestos-containing materials whenever they're going to do replacing of light bulbs or pin or hang pictures. So there has to be a list of don'ts depending on the work that your workers are doing. So if you already know they have certain activities that they do regularly, and let's say you got a new client who is located in one of those areas of the city with older buildings, and you know that they do janitorial work, for example, well, dry dust or sweeping surfaces should be a big no-no, right? Because now they're going to be dusting off those presumed asbestos-containing materials. Sanding of flooring, right? That is tile or backing that is asbestos-containing, also not allowed. And you have to have specific procedures as to, you know, if you're going to deal with buffing or sanding is actually not allowed per the regulation on any asbestos-containing flooring. But what if they're buffing or they're, you know, removing some of the finish? What's the speed at which the machine needs to run at? Because the faster the speed, the faster they will wear through that finish, the more possibility of those fibers to become airborne. And also just developing those procedures, right? If that's something that they do. Using only HEPA filter vacuums, teaching them on how to change the filters, for example, and how often. So reading manufacturer's instructions and actually designating this particular HEPA and tools that they're going to be using as asbestos related tools and equipment, so that they're always bagged and taken to the sites in a special way. You cannot use it at every site. Why? Because it is impossible to truly decontaminate these pieces of equipment. So they should be used only for that purpose, and that's it. Dusting with a damp cloth or wet mop floor so it's not done dry. That was my bottle of water. So there's specific requirements for Washington, for California, for roofing, for flooring, for custodial light maintenance, for automotive repair. They have specific regulations in each of the states, such as Washington, Oregon, California. So depending where your operations are taking place, you have to review those. Last but not least, a ton of pictures that I got from asbestos.com. They're so useful. So if you do not have pictures that you've collected in your field work, use these ones. I love it because it's just great examples of that checkered floor, for example, in an old electrical plant or schools. Look at the floor in schools, right? Public schools, that it is older, or in a kitchen or a storage room, and it's all asbestos containing flooring, all of it, right? Some of it is in better condition than others, so the workers need to know what they can and cannot do, right? So look at this as the flooring is being worn and torn, how the backing is exposed, and the backing on this vinyl type flooring exposes the workers to the asbestos fibers. A lot of good pictures there also on textured ceilings and asbestos cement. And I particularly like these two because this is asbestos debris or cement pipe or cement or concrete that was left in a bag. And who knows what that is, if it's asbestos containing materials or not, but you cannot know, right? Until you test for it. So what should workers do if they encounter this? If one of their activities to actually pick up, clean up after crews that leave things like that. You have to protect your workers because that's putting them at risk if you haven't had the discussion and if you don't have an actual written procedure. All right. So we talked a lot about vermiculite as well. Oh, and this is a fun one. Back in the 50s, I think this what's advertised as having the best cigarette filters, right? And it was made of asbestos. So people were actually breathing through an asbestos filter. Crazy. But why? It's because it's fire resistant. So the smoking experience was smoother, right? It's just so weird because we're talking about stopping smoking if you are exposed to asbestos. And here is smoking with an asbestos filter. So fun facts there for you guys as well to share during the class. It makes everything, it just brings people back to the class. Many times when we share all of these facts and all of these things for safety, people just fall asleep, especially if they're used to being out in the field. So having that interaction and having these fun facts also helps. So letting them know forbidden practices and then highlighting those that they are not supposed to do and then telling them how to do it, right? And if you can collect pictures during your inspections, because throughout these many classes, we've talked about making sure that you walk the walk, you inspect randomly some of those field sites that your workers are at. All right, so more on some of these asbestos emergency kit. And the last slide in this show, I put the actual requirements under the Cal OSHA regulations because I knew you would want that. Anyways, any more questions? Isn't it amazing? We are done with today's topic. Demolished. Okay, so I have a question. Is the first step to test all the building materials for asbestos and then remove them if they all contain asbestos? It just doesn't sound practical. This is why, for this question, you have to be certified for removal because you have already procedures that are nicely delineated and you do not have to juggle with this type of question. So I'm just going to leave it up to whoever is going to do the demo or the removal because they need to be certified through Cal OSHA and they have already a fantastic way of doing it the right way. All right, guys, thank you so much for sharing this full hour with me. I'm extremely grateful. I will see you next month, first Friday of the month. Spread the word with 1 hour, full hour CEUs, and you can email Liz if you need your CEUs. And don't forget, we will have heat illness May 15, May 16 in Spanish. And I'll see you also in our June, first Friday of the month topic. Thank you all. Thank you all of you that are showing your comments and yes, asking for the information. Slideshow will be sent. And I will also send you guys a copy of that outline because I know you like it. I'll include the silica one as well. Thank you, Debbie. You're awesome. Thank you. I see so many of the wonderful names that accompany us every single month during the series. Thank you, Liz, again, for your wonderful help and your time. I'll see you next month, guys. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, everyone. If you would like a certificate for today's session, please email me at erc@ph.ucla.edu. We will be sharing all of the information that Alba shared that she would share as well. I'll also share the recording for this webinar so you have that to reference if you'd like to include any of the information from today's session. And then last but not least, you will be receiving an evaluation for today's webinar. Please complete the evaluation. Any feedback that you have is very much appreciated, and we'll use that information to also get what you all want to learn for future safety webinar series and other courses that we're going to offer in our continuing education program. We also need that evaluation for the continuing education units to be able to continue to provide them for these webinars, so your feedback is highly appreciated.
Thank you, guys. We'll see you next month. Thank you, Liz.